anyone who thinks, particularly in the tech sector, that the days of self-regulation can continue, those days are over. We need a new way to approach this.
One for Mum, one for Dad, and one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian.
Budgets are about choices, Fran, and you show what you value through the choices you make.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared. The Treasurer knows.
I want an economy that works for people, not the other way around.
We'll just end up being a third-rate economy, a banana republic.
Just follow the money.
G'day, and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast that explains economics, politics and policy in plain English. I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Australia Institute. The media industry has changed radically over the last 3 decades, transformed by the 24-hour news cycle, social media, and now artificial intelligence.
The country woke up today to find most Australian news pages were just a blank space.
Facebook blocking news feeds to its users in response to a proposed Australian law that would make big tech giants pay for news feeds on their platforms.
This is a huge reform, and the world is watching what happens here in Australia.
A breaking story, Sophie, this is huge. Just in, staff at 9 newspapers are set to begin a 5-day strike.
Hundreds of editorial staff across Nine's newspaper division in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane and Perth walked off the job this morning.
Now, workers have rejected Nine management's offer of a 3.5% pay increase. This strike action, of course, occurring on the eve of the Olympic Games coverage.
Artificial intelligence, with its easily accessed voice cloning and face swapping tools, adding a new dimension to the political universe.
What I worry about in particular is that 2024 will be a GPT election. It will be the first time that these technologies are available in the context of an election, in the context of hundreds of millions of dollars.
This week, we're bringing you a conversation between Australia Institute Executive Director Richard Dennis and 3 very special guests that was recorded live at our latest Politics in the Pub event in Canberra. Richard was joined on stage by Senator Sarah Hanson-Young, the Greens Arts and Communications spokesperson, Karen Percy, Federal President at the Media, Entertainment and Arts Alliance, and Ed Husic, the Minister for Industry and Science, who ended up arriving just a little late after rushing over straight from a busy day at Parliament. Together, they discussed whether quality journalism can survive in Australia, making the digital giants pay for the content that they use, and how we can restore trust in media after the Voice referendum. I hope you enjoy.
So let me just start, Sarah, by saying, here we sit in Australia in 2024. The media landscape's changed radically since you've been in Parliament. The issues that we're worried about now are really quite different from the issues that we had to worry about when you first got into Parliament. How do you think we need to think about regulating these new technologies, these new opportunities, these new challenges? What do we need to do?
We're really at a crunch point now where it's not just the impact of the big social media giants that are hoovering up all the advertising revenue, and so therefore, kind of the free-to-air televisions and the newspapers are struggling to pay people, understand what they're, have that base and that stability. But people are consuming their news differently. They are actually consuming it online in a more rapidly changing way. And then, of course, it's not just social media companies. It is also the impact of AI and those generated learning platforms. It would be remiss of me to not acknowledge the fact that even as of yesterday, dozens of people at Fairfax, now 9, have lost their jobs. Journalists who have been around for a very long time, experienced and very, very good journalists. And that's the story of the last decade. Is more and more journalists having to, choose other careers. I think as a consumer, when you think about, when you log on, whether you read your newspaper online or you, look on your social media feed and see what's there, or you open up your email in the morning and see what's in your email from the news agency platform that you subscribe to, people also are becoming more and more concerned about the quality of what they're reading. And we know that while even the ABC, the public broadcaster, is still the most trusted news source, actually overall, news agencies and the trust of news is falling. And I think that from a political perspective and as a member of parliament, I find that really concerning. People don't trust politicians. Well, that's probably been, forevermore.
Fair enough.
Forevermore. But when we do speak to journalists about a particular topic, we expect and need that trust in what is published. And increasingly, people are not doing that. So we do need regulation. We need regulation for how the business models are managed. We need regulation for protecting and supporting the content, the work that people are actually doing, so it's not just being ripped off. And we need regulation so that there is some element of investing in trust, and that trusted sources are able to be found. People know what they are, and they have some assurance that is what when they read a news piece, they know and can feel. You may not agree with it, but the facts in there are actual facts.
Karen, your member's job is to collect those facts, check those facts, report those facts. I assume there's a few of your members here tonight, and by definition, the fact that the rest are here, it's just proof. Look around how many people are actually interested in these issues. How do your members kind of respond to these challenges? How do your members see the rise of social media, the rise of artificial intelligence? Are they excited about the opportunities, or scared of the threats? Or
it's pretty terrifying what's going on right now, frankly. The business models are broken, have been broken for some time. AI deals with digital giants haven't made a squat of difference to the business models, frankly. So the business models are broken. We're losing senior journalists, as we've seen at The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald this week. And what's a senior journalist now is not what was a senior journalist when I started. So therefore, you've got fewer senior journalists, fewer layers of checks and balances. There aren't the people to mentor each other anymore. So when I was coming up through the ranks, if I made a clanger of a mistake, it got picked up pretty quickly. Those kind of checks and balances aren't there in the same way anymore. So and workloads are incredible.
That's what's wrong with the front page of The Australian.
No comment. So you've got fewer journalists. Their workloads are harder. We now have these algorithms that, the first thing a news editor does in the morning is look up what's on Google Trends. And if they don't have the story that's at the top of Google Trends, they get that story. So we're losing the side of the public interest to a large degree. Ethics is starting to waver, and that's part of that trust issue. There are brilliant journalists doing brilliant work. There's a lot of them in this room tonight, but so much of their work gets pushed down the chain by the algorithms, by what people supposedly want. So we've got kind of the tail wagging the dog to a large degree. So, and there's only so much the journalists themselves can do. We've got all these high, mighty editors who are paid a ton of money, who have no ideas, no innovation, continuing to think that you can just rely on gambling money or on the same kind of broken model. So that's a big problem too, the leadership at that level. So, the journalists themselves are doing their very best under extremely difficult circumstances. The amount of material you have to file as a journalist these days is incredible. The pressure of social media to get it out there quickly. So, and I'm not saying that there aren't problems in our industry in terms of ethics and some of the quality and trust, etc. But you have to understand these extraordinary circumstances that journalists have been dealing with for 10, 15 years that just won't let up. Walk of shame. Walk of shame. Hi, Ed.
Can we have a round of applause for Ed? Raced out of Parliament just to be here with us, talking about such an important issue. So no, thanks, Ed. I really, really appreciate you making it. Ed, we've just covered off on how to fix the media globally. So
terrific! Thanks.
You can
so glad you dealt with that.
Just take a breath.
Yeah.
But no, look, thanks so much. I was just about to take the conversation to the fact that the challenges that we're facing in Australia, they're not unique to Australia. You know, the rise of social media, the rise of AI, the collapse of the business model of traditional newspapers. It's a real issue here in Australia, but we're not the only ones experiencing it. So let's sort of start big picture. Where do you see the opportunities given what we're doing in Australia, what's happening overseas? Like we've talked a bit about the threats. What can we do differently?
Well, I mean, I'd see both at the same time, the opportunity and the threat. Clearly, the upside supposedly was that the internet and being able to have broadband would provide access to information, that we'd have much better informed citizenry, that we'd dispel myths much quicker, we get that information distributed. It'd be great for news outlets. They could reach more eyeballs. We went on to mobile phones. We thought that would also change things for the better as well. And I think what we have seen is what usually happens with technology. The promise filters out to be something else. And I've never approached this subject, particularly with my deep interest in technology. I've never just gone utter utopian and utter dystopian. There is something that broadly hits the middle, but it requires a lot of work. And it requires work not just from governments, but from businesses as well as the broader public to put pressure to do better. And so while it has provided a lot of upside, fundamentally, once Google AdWords became a thing, it transformed media. That was the point at which that fuse was lit. And it changed the way in which people could advertise. And clearly, advertising revenues were the biggest thing that sustained media for so long. And then that has had that ripple effect that we have. I don't need to tell a crowd like this. We have lived this all. We have seen the pressures that this has placed on media, and a recognition fundamentally that a strong base of media does provide us with one of the best ways to get our information. And as a result, to be better informed. And as a result, it's not just the readers, but clearly as people who shape news, we need to be able to have the confidence that what we're seeing is legit. So all those things have combined in one way or other that have required governments to really engage in technology. And I'll just end on this point. The permissiveness around technology, I've seen that change, having followed technology for quite some time as a parliamentarian with an interest in this. The whole notion that self-regulation would be able to moderate and contain the worst aspects of the application of technology, well, boy, that's gone out the window long ago. And in the area that I'm particularly focused in around the rise of generative AI and the risks and the benefits that are posed by it, I've constantly said anyone who thinks, particularly in the tech sector, that the days of self-regulation can continue, those days are over. We need a new way to approach this and to be able to have the confidence of the public in what they're seeing.
Look, thanks so much for that, Ed. And I guess for me, when under the previous government, the creation of the media bargaining code was proposed, it was far from perfect legislation. The Murdoch press were the major beneficiaries of it. A lot of people, including us at the Australian Institute, kind of had to bite down on that. But it was seen at the time by myself and others, including the Greens and Labor, as well. It was better than doing nothing. And since then, we've seen a lot of other countries trying to actually step in and do something about the bargaining power of the tech giants and the need to use that to support traditional media. So with the benefit of hindsight, I'll go to you first, Sarah, but it really, from my point of view, was kind of a pretty unique experience in Australian politics. There was tripartisan support for a pretty contentious bit of legislation on the basis that actually, if Australians stuck together, we might actually be able to get something out of Facebook and Google. And other countries have tried that. It's, people have been unable to hold the politics of that together. So,
yeah,
what are your reflections on that?
Look, I think it was an important piece of legislation, not perfect. And I think, 3 or 4 years on, things change so rapidly that we actually have to adapt. We can't. Nothing in this space, and Ed knows this. We've talked about this a lot. You can't just set and forget when it comes to tech, and even that pace is getting faster and faster. So I'm not surprised that 3 or 4 years on, we're looking at the News Media Bargaining Code and having to go, okay, well, we can't just we don't actually just want Meta to renew their contracts, because actually we need to improve the regulation as it is. But it was important, and it was important for 2 reasons. One, we actually had to start having a conversation with the big media corporations and the medium corporations, and start giving an ear and understanding what's happening for independent media, that the landscape had changed so much. And if we didn't do something, we were going to lose a whole lot of journalists, a whole lot of media platforms. I mean, The Guardian wouldn't have been able to survive, I don't believe, if we hadn't have been able to step in and do something. So that's the first thing. We had to kind of be faced with the reality that the landscape had changed, and government had to adapt, and the parliament had to adapt. The second thing is, I've always been a big believer that these big tech companies do need to be regulated. I've never bought this idea of self-regulation. I've never kind of thought that, oh, well, what goes on online is somehow different to what happens in the real world. It's not. But they had continued for so long writing their own rules and then trying to stare people down. I mean, politicians are not very tech literate, to be fair. And so, often you'd have representatives from some of these big tech companies come in, and they'd meet with politicians or present to us in inquiries, and we would just be bamboozled. Like the actual information exchange was not on a fair playing field. And I think part of that is why governments have been slow to act. But we had to kind of do something. And I think if I took the position, and I've been very honest with this, yes, the Murdoch press was helped out by this. I had people going, why on earth would we be doing something to get money into the coffers of the Murdoch press? Frankly, there's some good journalists there, right? There are some good journalists who work in News Corp. I think Michael Miller at one of my Senate inquiries recently said that. He said he backs some of his journalists.
You might disagree on which ones.
I might ask him on notice yet which ones he was referring to. But no, look, there are good journalists across the country who work in a variety of these organisations, and we need them. But I made the decision that if you have all the major media companies in the country, if they're all backing regulation, isn't that the best opportunity to be able to push back and test some regulation on these big global giants? And I still think that was the right thing to do. If we didn't start somewhere, I tell you what, these bastards at Meta or at Google, if we had folded then and gone weak at the knees then, there's no way we'd be having a conversation now about what we do of protecting people's intellectual property in the arts and the creative industries or in journalism when it comes to AI. Absolutely no way. We had to start somewhere, and we started with the News Media Bargaining Code.
And when you was talking then, I thought, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, but what happens online stays with you forever. So
Can I just weigh in?
Yeah, please.
The News
Karen.
Bargaining Code, from our perspective, when you see the kind of numbers of journalists who are losing their jobs currently, yes, it was great to see money into the industry, but there was no obligation to spend it on journalism. There was no obligation to keep it in the country even. So it was a pretty warped piece of legislation, though I absolutely agree it was important to have something, and to also to stand up and show them that, that they can't get away with it, because there's this whole argument, that Facebook makes that, news is only a small amount of what we actually do. And when you've seen the democratization, i.e. the shitification of the internet that is taking place currently with Facebook, with the utter garbage that is in your timeline, you believe there might only be 3% of news. But the bottom line is the data that comes out of surveys here is that a lot of people, more than 50% of people, are getting their news via social media, and the biggest one is Facebook. So there's a real disconnect between the narratives. But with all that money sloshing around, the industry really is no more sustainable than it was 2.5, 3 years ago. And now you're seeing the media organizations jump at this AI. They want the AI money because they want the easy money because that's all they're used to. So there are real problems with that as well. And picking up on your point about the copyright, plagiarism, all of the problems that come from an organization essentially stealing the creative work of journalists and artists and musicians and the likenesses of actors and those on stage, etc. So there are real problems. The copyright, plagiarism that they seem to think that they can just get away with is extraordinary. And news organisations are certainly getting into the AI field as well. But there's been very little consultation with our members and journalists more generally. There's been some very bizarre kinds of concepts that people have come up with about videoing people and putting things in languages and all manner of very strange things that they want to do because they can, and nobody thinking about whether you really should. So I think there are some real problems. We need to really make sure that the AI space, as rapidly as it is moving, and it's no sooner do you get out of one section of quicksand, you're in another section of quicksand. So, we really need to have tight regulation. There needs to be real sanctions against companies that are forcing this. There needs to be consultation with the people who are using it. They need to be compensated. They need to get money out of it. Our freelance journalists, in particular, and journalists more generally. So there are some real issues. We can't allow this to be bogged down like we were with social media, where we kind of lost it before it had even really taken off.
Reflections on the bargaining code as it was, but also where to from here. I mean, some of your colleagues have sort of been hinting at maybe we just need a levy or maybe we just need a tax, but there's no silver bullet here. But what do you think about the past and what could we do better in the future?
So I've been given permission to talk outside of cabinet tonight, so we're not being live streamed.
No,
so
we're not
okay.
live streamed. This is just between us.
No, phew. Okay.
Asterisk,
look,
that's not true.
We are going through all of that. There are a number of things to pick up. There's definitely a recognition within government, particularly in terms of our party, about the fact that we do need to ensure that platforms that commercially benefit, where their business model is having an impact, most notably in terms of democracy and the way in which democracy is fueled, particularly with respect to the way that events are covered and the outlets that do that. We've got to get that right. And we've spoken very strongly on the fact that these big platforms, digital platforms, will have to pay their way. There is a lot of, when you're talking earlier about, Facebook, I mean, shock horror that an organization that might have to pay for something is suggesting that what's there they don't really need to pay for because it's such a low amount, but reality says otherwise. Standard practice by big firms to avoid their obligations. I don't think anyone in the real world believes that social media is not the big source of information for people by picking up stories that appear through media outlets and featuring them on the platform. So that has to be dealt with. I think there's an element of, in particular around generative AI and the training of it, I think there's an element of the current generation feeling like they should be able to get away with what the pioneers did. I mean, in Google's case, they literally crawled everywhere online, picked up every bit of data that they could to train their models. And the belief now is, well, if they could get away with it, why can't we? And the reality is the rest of the world has woken up. They recognize that people who have generated that content should be there should be a commercial arrangement that reflects the creative content that was used to generate that they then make money out of. And so for a lot of the big firms, and we're leading that, some of that work is already being done by my colleague in Mark Dreyfus, looking at the copyright implications of the impact of AI. That is going to have to happen. I mean, I do, picking up on some of the points that Sarah said, as a backbencher, I had some, rather dry views about the media bargaining code, particularly as it came to my good friends at News Limited, and and they know that I use that phrase, and I pay for it every single day. But I do recognise the points that Sarah absolutely did raise. It wasn't. We had to look at it not from the perspective or the lens of one particular group. And I am a big believer, and I'll pick up on the similarity with what Sarah said. You do need to have good centre-right voices as much as you need centre-left. Our democracy is not a one-way street. What we want, though, is that when media outlets say that they are genuinely independent, that it's independence with both eyes, not one. So I'm a big believer in that. And they need to allow for various voices to feature on their own platforms. And I think the point that was raised about the money that does get effectively redistributed from those big digital platforms, that they are used. That was one of my big things too, that journalists, that they provide for more journalism, more journalists, and that they also provide a career pathway for the next generation that come through as well. Because I think the platforms will benefit from from quality journalism. A lot of us know that while AI might be used to supplement the work of journalism, that ultimately even those big generative AI platforms will say to me, we know that the quality of our output is not 100%. It does require people. It cannot be all machine to be able to do that work. But more importantly, the analysis provided by people who have watched in particular what this town focuses on, because we're all here, quality analysis from senior journalists that have been there, that have done that. A machine can't provide that experience from someone who's been there and seen it all. That's what we value as readers, certainly what we value as politicians, and that has to be paid for. And if the dynamics, the economics of media have changed, as Sarah rightly said, we need to change with the times, and we need to make sure that continues to be the case.
Sarah, it looks like you've got something to say.
Well, I want to say, look, I think, the analysis of somebody like Laura Tingle, that is not just watching what's happened that day, that is years of experience of understanding what's happened and being able to, pick through it. Having said that, I reckon Sky After Dark could probably be done with AI. It's pretty repetitive.
Maybe it is.
It's pretty repetitive. No, I do think we need to. There is.
I'm going to pay for that too.
There's a variety of different ways I think we need to respond, right? I don't think there's one silver bullet here. I do think the bigger media companies haven't really held up their side of the bargain when it comes to making sure they're reinvesting this money back into public interest journalism, and particularly ensuring that there is an up-and-coming generation, as Ed has mentioned. But I do think it's time to put a big a tax on these big social media companies. They hardly pay anything, right? It is time to make sure they pay some of their fair share. What we do with that and how that's distributed is another question.
And we'd have real concerns about ensuring that that's a really, really robust process, that it's fair, and that it is, we've got a lot, the media landscape is very different, than it was 15 or 20 years ago. Sure, we've still got the big legacy media, but there are so many small ones who've been cut out of the news bargaining code who should be part of the news bargaining code. So we'd be wanting to ensure that that was a really robust process, that it cannot be corrupted, and that there's accountability as well. That's been really lacking in this model, is the accountability of what you've actually spent the money on, and ensuring that that new generation is coming through. The journalists who are starting today are going to have much, much shorter careers than I did, and than a lot of those that are there now. And to your point about Laura Tingle, that's right. If you don't have the corporate knowledge and the fact that you can understand and know who's been before and can actually analyze more than what's in front of you today, then we all lose out. So we all should have a vested interest here as well. I'd also say on the AI front that, one thing that's really, really important is the journalist code of ethics. And that needs a human eye, and it needs a human heart and a human ear. The code of ethics are a set of guidelines, and you can break any one of those 12 tacits, but you have to sit there and be able to justify it and be able to actually argue, we're going to breach this particular part of it, and we've talked about it and we've thought about it. An AI generative program's not going to be able to do that with the right kind of ethical eye. Similarly, sourcing is absolutely fundamental in journalism. fundamental. You need to know where that has come from. And generative AI in the main is just scraping from a whole lot of different places. There was a report out a couple of days ago where pro-Russian sort of Kremlin-backed bots had started up hundreds and hundreds of so-called news sites that are just generating all manner of mostly material anti the Democratic Party in the US. Now, how is it that the digital giants and digital regulators can't figure out that a website starts today and by tomorrow has 1 million hits? Like, it's extraordinary, the lack of will of digital giants and those who could be controlling this in actually doing anything about it. I think I witnessed last year some of the AI, it might have been OpenAI, one of their executives in front of a congressional committee basically saying, please regulate us, please stop it, because if that organisation does that, my organisation has to do the same thing. They know it's a hiding to nothing, but they know there's money in it and they have to do something about it. I mean, how extraordinary is that they are saying to congressmen and women, please regulate us, otherwise this is going to end in an absolute disaster.
And they weren't just saying that to Congress. I mean, I, on behalf of the Australian government, attended the UK AI Safety Summit in November last year, where in the leaders' meeting, you had the representatives of all these firms, not just OpenAI, say exactly the same thing. Part of it is, again, driven by a commercial interest, because they won't necessarily apply, coming to your point about the ethical dimension. Like, if the ethical dimension runs in to the commercial imperative and they've got shareholders, they which way they'll fall on the equation. And they said exactly the same thing. This will be something that governments need to do. And you've seen it effectively in the last week. I think Microsoft came out, said exactly the same thing, that they need that. And they also understand too, and governments should not resile from this. You can still innovate with regulation. Anyone who suggests that innovation will be stifled if you regulate AI conveniently walks past the fact that we have life-changing medicines that are still heavily regulated. We have transport standards, and yet we're still coming up with new ways of getting ourselves around. The concept is not new and alien. We do need to get it right. And the issue too, in terms of particularly big tech as well, is that they will constantly find ways to attempt to bamboozle, in particular, parliamentarians, lawmakers, with the complexity of it all. We need to focus on what is the outcome, what are we seeking to achieve, and getting them to work to that end. It is not impossible to do, but the key will be, I mean, I have to say, my personal surprise, having watched again in this space for some time when it comes to technology, governments have previously been very hands-off. To see 30 governments come around a table and say, yep, we need to get involved in terms of AI and the regulation of it, that is a step change we have not seen before, and we need to be able to build on that and not get bamboozled on it. There's a lot of talk about black boxes and opening up that and understanding the algorithm. Wow. The key things are knowing the data that goes in, making sure that the biases don't influence the output, and that the output is something that we, as people, as the citizenry, as countries, are comfortable with.
Yeah, I think that element of transparency is so crucial here, though, Ed, because you've got the big companies who know that the community and users are saying, well, hang on a minute, what's going on here? This is the Wild West, and where's the government? And not just your government, I'm saying, globally. And so, that is why they're coming to the table and saying, okay, all right, we'll take some regulation. But as soon as you get in front of them and you start to talk about, okay, well, how does this work? What do we do here? What do we do here? They go, oh, well, no, we're not going to talk to you about our algorithms. We're not going to talk to you about what's in the black box. We're not going to talk to you about, how our advertising model is actually working, how we target it. I mean, the thing is, Meta and Google are the biggest advertising companies in the world, and they are so sophisticated. And if people really understood and knew as individual users how targeted it was, you would be horrified about your breach of privacy. Absolutely horrified. And as soon as you raise these issues, the big tech goes, oh, well, we'll just do this. So they want regulation, but they want light touch regulation. And I think that is, we can't be fooled into this idea of, co-design or a little bit here and we'll behave. No, I actually think we need to go in hard and we need to regulate and we need to stare them down.
Well, the good news is, of course, that what the Media Bargaining Code taught us is that News Limited love regulation, don't at all want a free market, and are very, very happy to have other people pay them money. So, there's a few principles of being.
Oh, I love when News Corp say, but regulation, yes, regulate them,
Yes.
regulate them.
Everybody else.
Everybody else.
Well, that's where I want to take it now. We don't have too much time, and I do want to get to some audience questions. But I want to get to the question of trust, because it's fair to say that it's not just big tech companies that people don't trust. There's a lot of distrust of the media. Sarah was saying before you got here, Ed, that even trust in the ABC has been declining. Journalists don't actually rate that high on trusted professions. So I guess my question to each of
If you say politicians aren't trusted, I'm leaving this stage
well,
right now.
Sarah already ratted you out. I'm sorry. She took one for the collective parliamentary team. But
all my beliefs, like just sand in the breeze.
So we should be worried about big tech, but let's be clear, there are people that are worried about trust in the media itself. There's a trade-off here, however, like freedom of speech versus regulation. We want companies to be responsible, but we want governments telling the media what to say. So we're not going to solve that trade-off tonight. But before we head to the audience, I'd be interested in each of your thoughts on how we can actually restore some faith in the media, which is different from how can we regulate big tech. They're not unrelated, but we've got to address the media issue as well.
The public interest is the most important part. Is the media companies, news companies have their social licenses via that public interest, and it changes. It's not actually easy to define necessarily, and I have been one to resist definition in lots of cases because it can change from week to week, day to day, year to year. But that public interest and understanding that it's different to what the public's interested in, but the public interest and the public good. And so much of the social license of what we do as journalists and media organisations comes from that. And I think putting that at the heart of things, is this in the public interest? Sure, media organisations have to make money. So there has to be a certain information, infotainment, entertainment, no doubt about that. And there always has been through time that, news organisations haven't always just done the hard edge stuff. There has to be a soft part as well. But we've now, back to the tail wagging the dog, is that, there's so much clickbait out there. But if you go on the ABC's website, you go on News Corp's website, you go on media organisations' website, there's fantastic journalism there. Sometimes you have to really go looking. And that's the problem, is that, they're not elevating that important investigation into the water supply going into, a farming area, or then they're not elevating it the same way, and the algorithms muck things around as well. So to me, it's about getting back to some basics of the public interest. Why are we here? Holding power to account. We say that a lot and we don't do it as much as we should. So to me, it's about getting back to basics and also having real questions about whether a news organisation is upholding that public interest. And I would argue most of them do. I think there is so much good journalism. You need to just go further down the website, sadly. And if you look at some of the algorithms that some of the tech companies want to put there, that's going to get even worse, particularly with the AI, generative AI, where those companies doing the generative AI are going to scrape the material and they'll put up something that is theirs, but in fact, it's taking everybody else's work. So it's hugely problematic. But that's what I think, it has to get back to basics, and we can't do just everybody doing the same thing. Original journalism that is really tailored to your audience, understanding your audience and your community, and not everybody doing the same old stuff. Getting away from that Google Trends thing I was talking about at the very beginning, where an editor at the beginning of the day says, if I don't have what's on Google Trends, I'm in trouble, when in fact you're better off having something that's original, because that's what your community needs.
Sarah?
Yeah, I think how do you restore trust in journalism? I come back to the first thing I said right at the beginning. We have to have well-funded public broadcasting. We really do. There needs to be a benchmark, and it has been, the ABC has been denigrated by funding cuts, but denigrated by political influence, and we need to understand why Australia is actually so lucky as a democracy that we have a public broadcaster in and of itself, and we need to protect that. So that's the first thing I would say. I also think we have to call out some of this rubbish around, the business models do need to be re-envisaged. They do. I mean, this last week where we've heard this excuse that we have to have gambling ads in order so that people can watch local news in rural and regional Australia. I mean, that is just absurd. Like, if the cost of local journalism is gambling addiction, we're broken. Like, we really are. So we've got to kind of up our ambition, I think. The government has been promising for quite some time that we would see a kind of a media reform that would look at how we invest in public interest journalism, the ways of doing that beyond just the News Media Bargaining Code. And it still hasn't come. And it's not your responsibility, Ed, so I'm not putting it on you. But we need a genuine conversation about how we fund public interest journalism, how we look after it, and these glib excuses that, the only reason Channel 7 News exists is because of gambling addicts, that is not helping. And it's not helping build that social license.
Ed, how do we build trust or create trust in the media?
So I got members of my team that are here tonight. I just want to use the words that always makes them nervous. Can I take a contrary view?
Please.
Well, the whole trust thing, everyone, it's more the intersection of tech and media. And I know we tend to go, this is what the algorithm's doing. But, back in the day, it wasn't an algorithm, it was a sub-editor. I mean, there was always someone making a call about what we saw first in the newspaper, right? So it's just moved from humans, and then we've picked it up, and we've now given AI the job to power up effectively clickbait. And if any journalist says, with the greatest respect, that they don't take note of how many eyeballs have read their news article, I mean, even they acknowledge they do it. They want to be able to get news. And there's an element, and I'm not saying this in a accusatory way to journalists, but there is an element of what news do we normally as readers gravitate to? We always gravitate to either the sensational, the negative, or the titillating, as you described it, right? So there's an element of, I look at it all in terms of that context. What's happened is that it has been certainly supercharged or turbocharged through AI, but it has been a formula that has been around for a while, right? And there's no escaping that. I do worry when I look more at the tech side, generative AI will pump out so much visual and audio content, and it will, there are concerns, particularly in the tech space, that it will overwhelm organic material. The stuff
it already has.
There you go.
It already has.
So it's pumping that material out, and so the key will be, when it comes to trust, about knowing what is, as I describe it, organic versus
It needs
generated.
to be labelled or identified.
And that's what I've also
But the bad
been,
faith actors aren't going to label.
been quite open about in times past, which is to say we do need to know. We need to have that labelling so that people know authentically what has actually been generated as a result of, a Sarah Hanson-Young or an Ed Husic or any other politician saying something versus what's been created, because it does influence things. And I do get that on the point that's been raised by Sarah in particular, the minute you confront tech will say we need to be regulated, but the minute you go to do something, they say not that far. But I think the public wants the assurance. Every time you poll the public, they say that they've got concerns about generative AI and the way it'll be used. And some of the advancements too, I mean, now OpenAI just needs 15 seconds of your voice, and then they can generate dialogue that sounds like you. Now, they have said they will hold back because one of the biggest elections on the planet is playing out before our eyes, and they know what that would do. could you imagine a robocall that sounds like a Kamala Harris or a Donald Trump, coming to your home saying the most Donald.
Don't need AI for that.
But a politician saying an outrageous thing that you thought was legit, we should have the confidence that political parties are not, or more broadly, that what you're seeing is legitimate and that you can have faith in it. And so that will require some work too. I mean, there are a whole lot of trust issues more broadly that I know are being contemplated through some of the comments that have been raised so far. But I guess I wanted to inject it from the perspective of the way that technology is going and the way that governments need to get their head around it. And quite frankly, the fact that the low level of tech literacy will not cut it anymore for parliamentarians. We need to get across this because these will shift profoundly. These forces will profoundly reshape societies. I'm not being over dramatic on it, but if we don't get it right, it does have that potential.
Yeah.
We also need literacy for everybody about what to look for and what the signs are, and that's something that I would really put on a lot of you as well, is that you all need to get yourselves much more aware about how you can detect some of this stuff. It can be very difficult, but ensuring that you're going to trusted sources and checking, don't believe everything you see. So I think that there's a lot of us have to actually really lift our literacy on that as well. But that's up to consumers
we
as
do,
well.
But let's be clear, we exploit consumers in every other domain all day long. No, this is why we need regulation. Let's be clear. The finance sector's been ripping people off for a long time. The food industry's been lying to people for a long time. Lying to consumers is not new. And we've fallen for you can't regulate this stuff for too long. I just think we need to own the fact that deception has always been a profitable strategy. It's just this deception is bigger than we've imagined before. And in turn, it's going to be more profitable than the deceptions we've had before. But on a brighter note, there's nothing to stop us using AI to detect AI. I don't think for a minute you have to figure out if that person's got 6 fingers or not, or whether the crease on their elbow looks a little bit odd. We could actually be using AI, governments could be using AI to detect AI and to actually label it. And, again, let's be clear, we've spent decades saying we can't make magazines stop putting fake images of women in magazines. We've been lying to you about what people look like in advertising for decades. And other countries stepped in and said, no, if you want to distort someone and make them look like not quite a human, you got to stick a thing on it and make it clear that that's not what that woman looked like when the photo got taken. That's not what that girl looked like when the photo got taken. But we in Australia have decided to trust the market on that. This is just the continuation.
We also don't even have truth in political advertising.
I'm trying to jump to that.
Let's get that done.
Well, that's my last question. Because we're going to get the audience.
Sorry, Rich.
Yeah.
Always ahead of the curve.
Well, no, I'm that predictable. All right. So my last question is, trust is important. We're heading into an election. We saw what happened in the Voice campaign. There were calls before the Voice campaign, including from the Australian Institute for Truth in Political Advertising Laws. They got them here in the ACT. Give yourselves a round of applause. Sky hasn't fallen. The Sky, not Sky TV. South Australia's got them. So I'll just quickly ask each of you, yes, we need to regulate big tech. Yes, we need to find ways to build trust in the media. But do the people who make the rules and the people who make the rules about elections, should our parliament be coming up with laws to help make it harder for people to lie during election campaigns? Ed, I'll come to you first.
Oh, thank you. That's so handy. I am going to answer this way, and I don't care about the derision, the wave of it that I'll get. I'm going to leave it to Don Farrell.
Okay.
So, but what I will say is, though, we are very alert to the impact of AI, particularly in an election context. That is work that is being done by Don. It's certainly stuff I've spoken up previously about, and we have to take seriously. It'll be very hard to get truth in political advertising if we don't get that handled.
As in kind of deep fake.
Well, we've taken the step, as you obviously the Parliament moved today on our laws there, and we are looking at what else needs to be done to ensure that AI is not weaponised in election context.
And And we've got to make sure politicians and political parties don't think they can just say whatever they want to win votes. Third parties shouldn't be able to do that either. And, you know, I'd go a step further. We shouldn't be able to lie to win a vote. And I don't think we should be able to greenwash to make people spend money on products that aren't actually green either. Two things that are quite important at this time of history right now.
Absolutely, it needs to happen, but it also needs to, the regulators, whoever's going to be detecting this, have to have great powers to be able to shut things down very, very quickly. Because this kind of stuff, the lies, you know, I think, what is it, lies have gone halfway around the world before truth has got out of bed. I might have botched up some kind of cliche there, but you know, that's part of the problem, is that unless you've got the ability to do it very, very quickly, very, very swiftly, you know, and a real will to actually regulate.
Well, there has to be consequences, doesn't there?
Absolutely.
And that's a big part of this whole problem. If you don't have legal and political consequences, then people just go, oh, well, yeah, you said that, but whatever.
And that's where we'll leave this episode of Follow the Money. Thanks to Minister Ed Husic, Senator Sarah Hanson-Young and Karen Percy from the MEAA for joining us. This discussion was recorded live on Wednesday the 21st of August, and some things may have changed since recording. If you want to join our webinars or our in-person events live, you can find all the information on our website at australiainstitute.org.au. And we would love to hear your thoughts on the discussion today. You can reach out to us via email at podcasts@australiainstitute.org.au, or you can find us on Twitter at the Oz Institute with an AUS. I'm really sorry, but I refuse to call it X. Our theme music is by Jonathan McFeet from Pulse and Thrum, with additional music from Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Ebony Bennett. Thanks for listening.